A mafia boss married another man to protect him. Why would someone choose marriage as a way to offer protection? What hidden emotions or challenges could begin with such an unexpected promise? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. We are so glad you are here to enjoy another unforgettable story filled with emotion, mystery, and heartfelt moments. If you love meaningful stories like this one, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Your incredible support and encouragement mean more to us than words can express, and we truly appreciate you being part of this community. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, do you believe a marriage that begins with protection can grow into something deeper? Now, settle in, relax, and let us step into the beginning of this remarkable journey together. I used to believe that the safest promises were the ones no one wanted to make, until one unexpected wedding proved me completely wrong. Lucas Bennett had always imagined that if he ever stood at the front of a courthouse, it would be because he had found the love of his life, not because a stranger in a perfectly tailored black suit quietly slid a marriage license across the table and said it was the only way to keep him alive and free. The words sounded impossible, yet the calm certainty in Ethan Carter's voice left no room for argument. Ethan was known throughout Seattle as a powerful businessman whose influence reached far beyond the city's skyline, although whispers followed him wherever he went. Some admired his discipline, others feared his reputation, but almost no one truly knew the man behind the carefully controlled expression. Lucas certainly did not. Until that afternoon, he had never spoken to Ethan for more than a few minutes. Now the man was asking him to become his husband before sunset. Only hours earlier, Lucas had been living an ordinary life as an architectural designer, spending his morning reviewing renovation plans for an aging waterfront theater while enjoying coffee from the small cafe across the street from his office. He appreciated routines, quiet evenings, and simple conversations with friends. Drama belonged in movies, not in his everyday life. Everything changed when an elegant black vehicle stopped outside the office building and a polite woman introduced herself as Ethan Carter's legal advisor. She asked Lucas to join a private meeting, explaining only that the matter concerned his personal safety. Confused but curious, Lucas agreed. The meeting took place inside a modern conference room overlooking Elliott Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sunlight, while the city stretched peacefully beneath them, creating a calm setting that felt strangely disconnected from the seriousness waiting inside. Ethan stood near the window with one hand resting in his pocket. He turned as Lucas entered, offering a respectful nod instead of a handshake. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said in a steady voice. Lucas sat across from him, searching the man's expression for answers. "Your advisor said this meeting concerns my safety. I think I deserve an explanation." Ethan remained silent for several seconds before carefully choosing his words. "You deserve the truth. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you all of it today." Lucas frowned. "That is not very reassuring." Ethan acknowledged the frustration with a small nod. "I understand. That is why I am asking you to trust me before I ask you to understand me." Lucas almost laughed, convinced the conversation could not become stranger. Then Ethan calmly placed a marriage application on the polished table between them. "Marry me," he said. Lucas stared at the document before looking back at Ethan, certain he had misunderstood. "Excuse me. A legal marriage will immediately place you under my family's protection," Ethan explained. "It will also prevent certain people from reaching you through legal or financial channels." Lucas leaned back, unable to process what he had just heard. "You expect me to marry someone I barely know because you claim it will protect me?" Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "No, I expect you to decide whether you believe I would ask such a thing without an important reason." Silence settled over the room. Lucas searched Ethan's face for arrogance, manipulation, or even amusement, but found none. The proposal carried no romance, no pressure, and no false promises. It sounded less like an invitation and more like a responsibility Ethan wished he never had to offer. After several long moments, Lucas quietly asked the question that mattered most. "If I say yes, what happens after today?" Ethan answered with complete honesty. "I will protect you with everything I have, and I will never ask you to become someone you are not." Lucas barely slept that night. The marriage certificate rested on the small dining table inside his apartment, its official seal catching the glow from a single lamp as though reminding him that one signature could change an entire life. Every logical part of his mind insisted he should refuse. He knew almost nothing about Ethan Carter beyond the rumors repeated across Seattle. Powerful, wealthy, untouchable. Those descriptions belonged to headlines, not to someone asking for trust without offering complete answers. Yet one detail continued returning to him. Ethan had never tried to frighten him into accepting. He had not raised his voice, made threats, or offered extravagant promises. Instead, he had simply looked at Lucas with an honesty that seemed strangely unfamiliar in a world filled with carefully rehearsed conversations. Early the next morning, Lucas arrived at the address Ethan's advisor had provided. It was not a grand mansion or a crowded courthouse as he had imagined, but a quiet, historic building overlooking Elliott Bay where civil ceremonies were often held. Only a handful of people waited inside. Ethan stood near one of the tall windows wearing a charcoal gray suit, his posture calm and composed as though he had accepted the weight of difficult decisions long before that morning. When Lucas entered, Ethan immediately walked toward him. "You came," he said quietly. Lucas smiled with understandable nervousness. "I almost turned around twice." A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face. "I would not have blamed you." Lucas studied him for several seconds before asking the question that had remained in his thoughts all night. "If I walk away now, will you stop me?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "No. Your choice must remain your own." That single response settled something inside Lucas. A man seeking control would never have offered freedom so easily. Less than 30 minutes later, the ceremony quietly concluded. There were no elaborate decorations, no orchestra, no guests celebrating with applause. Only a judge, 2 legal witnesses, Ethan's advisor, and the simple exchange of signatures that officially joined 2 strangers in marriage. When the judge congratulated them, Lucas almost laughed at how unreal the moment felt. Ethan simply thanked the court before offering Lucas his coat as they stepped outside into the cool breeze drifting across the waterfront. Neither of them spoke during the short drive that followed. The silence felt awkward at first, but not uncomfortable. Finally, Lucas looked toward Ethan. "I suppose I should ask where we are going." Ethan glanced out the window before answering. "Home." The word lingered between them longer than either expected. Nearly 40 minutes later, the car entered a private estate surrounded by tall evergreen trees overlooking the water. The property was elegant without appearing extravagant, its architecture blending modern glass with warm natural stone. Inside, the atmosphere surprised Lucas even more. Instead of cold luxury, the house felt remarkably peaceful. Shelves filled with books lined the walls, fresh flowers decorated several rooms, and soft piano music quietly played through hidden speakers. Ethan noticed Lucas looking around. "I know this is unfamiliar," he said. "Take whatever time you need to become comfortable." Lucas nodded appreciatively. A housekeeper greeted him warmly before showing him to a spacious bedroom prepared specifically for him. The room overlooked a quiet garden filled with Japanese maple trees whose leaves moved gently in the afternoon breeze. There were no signs that anyone expected Lucas to change who he was. His favorite coffee had somehow already been stocked in the kitchen. A drafting table stood beside the window after Ethan's staff had quietly moved it from Lucas's apartment earlier that morning. Even several framed family photographs had been carefully placed exactly where they would be easy to recognize. Lucas slowly realized someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make this unfamiliar house feel like his own home. That evening, they shared dinner across a long wooden table far too large for only 2 people. Conversation remained simple, focusing on architecture, books, music, and favorite places around Seattle rather than dangerous mysteries. As the meal ended, Ethan placed a small key beside Lucas's plate. "This opens every room in the house except my private office," he explained. Lucas looked surprised. "You trust me that much?" Ethan met his eyes with complete sincerity. Trust has to begin somewhere. At that exact moment, unnoticed by either man, a black sedan slowed briefly beyond the estate gates before quietly continuing down the tree-lined road, its occupants confirming only one thing before disappearing into the evening traffic. Lucas Bennett was no longer living alone. By the end of the first week, Lucas realized the quiet estate followed a rhythm entirely different from the city he had always known. Every morning began with fresh coffee waiting in the kitchen before he even woke up. Every evening ended with the lights in the garden automatically glowing as the sun disappeared beyond Elliott Bay, and every member of the household greeted him with genuine respect instead of cautious curiosity. No one treated him like a guest who would eventually leave. They behaved as though he had always belonged there. The only person who remained difficult to understand was Ethan. He left early each morning, returned late in the evening, and never spoke about his work unless Lucas asked a direct question. Even then, his answers remained honest without revealing more than necessary. Lucas could not decide whether Ethan was protecting himself or protecting someone else. One Saturday morning, Lucas carried a sketchbook onto the back terrace overlooking the water. The peaceful view inspired him to redesign a public garden project his company had recently proposed for the city. As he concentrated on the drawing, he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Ethan placed 2 cups of coffee on the small wooden table before, taking a seat across from him. "You draw before breakfast?" Ethan asked with quiet amusement. Lucas smiled without looking up from the page. "Ideas never ask for permission before they arrive." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that better than you might think." For several comfortable minutes, neither man spoke. The silence felt natural rather than awkward. Finally, Lucas closed the sketchbook and looked at Ethan. "May I ask you something?" Ethan answered immediately. "You may ask anything." Lucas rested his elbows on the table. "Why does everyone here seem to know exactly what I need before I say a word?" Ethan glanced toward the nearby garden before replying. "Because I asked them to pay attention." Lucas laughed softly. "They even remembered my favorite coffee. You mentioned it once during our first meeting." Lucas looked genuinely surprised. "You remembered that?" Ethan met his eyes calmly. "I remember important details." The conversation drifted toward lighter subjects after that. Lucas spoke about architecture, explaining how buildings could influence the emotions of the people who entered them. Ethan admitted he often chose offices with large windows because natural light helped him think more clearly. The discovery made Lucas smile. Beneath Ethan's disciplined exterior lived someone who quietly appreciated beauty in ways few people would ever notice. Later that afternoon, Lucas decided to explore the estate on his own. Using the small key Ethan had given him, he wandered through the library, the indoor greenhouse, and a peaceful music room where an elegant grand piano stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. Although the instrument appeared rarely used, it had been carefully maintained. Lucas gently pressed one key, listening as the clear note echoed softly through the empty room. "It has been waiting for someone," Ethan said from the doorway. Lucas turned with an embarrassed smile. "I hope you do not mind." Ethan walked farther inside. "Not at all. My mother loved that piano. After she passed away, no one played it again." Lucas looked at the instrument with new understanding. "Some memories are difficult to touch." Ethan nodded. Quietly. "Yes." Before either man could continue, Ethan's phone vibrated. He glanced briefly at the screen, and for the first time Lucas noticed a subtle change in his expression. It was not fear. It was careful attention. Ethan placed the phone back into his pocket almost immediately. "I need to step away for a few minutes," he said. Lucas watched him leave without asking questions. Several minutes later, while walking through the front hallway, Lucas happened to pass an open study door. Ethan stood inside speaking quietly with his security chief. Lucas had no intention of listening, but one sentence reached him before he continued walking. "They confirmed someone has been watching the estate every evening this week." Lucas slowed instinctively. He had no idea who they referred to or why anyone would watch the house. But he suddenly understood one important truth. Ethan had not exaggerated when he said the marriage was meant to protect him. Whatever danger existed was real, and Ethan had been carrying its weight alone since the day they met. Lucas tried to convince himself that he had overheard only part of a routine security conversation, yet the words stayed with him throughout the evening. Someone had been watching the estate, and Ethan had known about it without allowing even a hint of anxiety to disturb the calm atmosphere inside the house. At dinner, Ethan spoke about ordinary things, asking whether Lucas had made progress on the waterfront garden design and recommending a local bakery famous for its sourdough bread. His voice remained steady, and if Lucas had not overheard the conversation earlier, he never would have guessed that anything unusual had happened. That quiet composure fascinated him almost as much as it frustrated him. After dinner, Lucas stepped onto the rear terrace with a cup of tea, hoping the cool air drifting across Elliott Bay would help him organize his thoughts. A few minutes later, the sliding glass door opened behind him. Ethan joined him without speaking, standing beside the railing while watching the lights from distant ferries move slowly across the dark water. "You look like you have something on your mind," Ethan finally said. Lucas smiled faintly. "You notice everything," Ethan answered with quiet honesty. "Only the things that matter." Lucas rested both hands on the wooden railing before looking toward the skyline. "I heard part of your conversation this afternoon." "I was not trying to listen." Ethan remained silent, waiting. "You said someone has been watching this place." For several long seconds, Ethan considered his response before giving Lucas exactly what he could. "That is true." Lucas turned toward him. "Does it have something to do with me?" Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked out over the bay as though measuring each word carefully. "Partly." Lucas exhaled slowly. "You promised honesty." "I did." "Then tell me why." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before meeting Lucas's gaze. "Because if I explain everything now, I will place other people in danger as well." "I cannot do that. But I can promise you something." Lucas waited. "Nothing that is happening is your fault." The sincerity in Ethan's voice made it impossible to believe he was hiding the truth for selfish reasons. Lucas nodded, although the unanswered questions remained. The next morning, Ethan surprised him by canceling several meetings. "I have neglected one important responsibility," he said while pouring coffee. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Which responsibility is that?" Ethan almost smiled. "Showing my husband the city properly." The sentence caught Lucas off guard. It sounded natural, spoken without embarrassment or performance. They spent the day walking through Pike Place Market, browsing bookstores, sampling fresh pastries, and watching street musicians perform beneath the warm afternoon sun. Ethan wore simple clothes that allowed him to blend into the crowd more easily, and Lucas discovered that away from business meetings and private estates, Ethan laughed more often than he expected. He listened carefully whenever Lucas described interesting buildings, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about architecture and urban design. At one point, Lucas stopped in front of a small independent bookstore. "This place has been here for decades," he said. "I used to come here every month." Ethan noticed the owner greeting Lucas by name with genuine warmth. As they left carrying several books, Ethan quietly remarked, "You leave people with good memories." Lucas looked surprised. "How could you possibly know that?" Ethan glanced back toward the smiling bookstore owner. "People only smile like that when kindness has become a habit." Lucas found himself unexpectedly speechless. No one had ever described him that way before. Late that afternoon, while they rested on a bench overlooking the waterfront, Lucas noticed an older couple walking hand in hand despite their slow pace. The sight made him smile. "They look happy." Ethan followed his gaze. "They look comfortable." Lucas considered the difference. Maybe comfort is what happiness becomes after enough time. Ethan looked at him for a brief moment before quietly agreeing. "I think you are right." On the drive home, neither man noticed the silver sport utility vehicle several cars behind them. It never came close enough to draw attention, never drove aggressively, and disappeared each time traffic became heavier. Yet when Ethan's security team reviewed the routine traffic cameras later that evening, they discovered the same vehicle had appeared behind them 3 different times that day, following from a careful distance without making a single mistake. Trust rarely arrives all at once. More often, it grows quietly through ordinary moments that seem unimportant until someone looks back and realizes everything changed because of them. The following week settled into a peaceful routine that neither Lucas nor Ethan had expected. Lucas returned to his architectural projects, converting one of the bright rooms overlooking the garden into a temporary studio. Ethan encouraged him to use the space however he wished, even arranging additional drafting equipment without mentioning it beforehand. When Lucas thanked him, Ethan simply replied that creative work deserved an environment where ideas could breathe. The answer lingered in Lucas's thoughts far longer than he admitted. Every evening, they shared dinner together whenever Ethan's schedule allowed. Sometimes they discussed books, sometimes music, and sometimes they sat comfortably in silence while watching the sunset paint Elliott Bay with shades of gold and deep blue. Lucas gradually realized that Ethan never interrupted him, never dismissed his opinions, and never treated his dreams as unrealistic. Instead, he listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions that made Lucas feel genuinely understood. One rainy afternoon, Lucas noticed several employees preparing decorations throughout the estate. Curious, he asked the housekeeper whether a special event was planned. She smiled warmly before answering. Today is Mr. Carter's birthday. Lucas stopped in surprise. His birthday is today? She nodded. He never celebrates it, but we still like to make the house feel a little brighter. Lucas felt unexpectedly disappointed that Ethan had never mentioned it. After thinking for a few moments, he drove into the city alone and visited the small independent bookstore they had explored together a few days earlier. He remembered Ethan pausing beside a beautifully bound collection of American history essays, quietly admiring the craftsmanship before placing it back on the shelf. Without hesitation, Lucas purchased the book, asking the owner to wrap it in simple brown paper instead of decorative packaging. By the time he returned home, evening rain had begun falling softly across the estate. Ethan arrived nearly an hour later than usual, looking more tired than Lucas had ever seen him. The moment he stepped inside, he apologized for being late, even though no apology was necessary. Lucas handed him the neatly wrapped package without saying a word. Ethan looked genuinely confused. "What is this?" Lucas smiled. "Open it." Ethan carefully unfolded the paper and stared at the book for several silent seconds. His expression softened in a way Lucas had never witnessed before. "You remembered," Ethan said quietly. Lucas laughed. "I learned from someone who remembers important details." Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment before thanking him with complete sincerity. There were no grand speeches, only quiet gratitude that somehow carried more meaning than elaborate words ever could. Later that evening, they sat together in the music room where rain tapped gently against the tall windows. Lucas rested his hands on the grand piano keys, playing a simple melody he remembered from childhood. The notes filled the room with warmth. Ethan listened without speaking until the final note faded into silence. "My mother used to play that exact song," he said softly. Lucas looked up in surprise. "Really?" Ethan nodded. "I had forgotten it until now." The room became quiet again, but this time the silence felt shared rather than empty. Just as Lucas prepared to play another melody, Ethan's security chief respectfully knocked on the open door. "I apologize for interrupting," he said, "but we have completed the review you requested." Ethan stood immediately. "I will be there in a moment." Before leaving, he looked toward Lucas. "Please stay here. I will not be long." Lucas nodded, though curiosity quickly overcame him after Ethan disappeared down the hallway. Several minutes later, he walked toward the library in search of a novel, only to notice the study door standing slightly open. Inside, a large digital screen displayed several photographs collected from traffic cameras across Seattle. Lucas instantly recognized the same silver sport utility vehicle he had seen during their trip downtown. Beside the images appeared a sentence that caused his heartbeat to slow with sudden realization. "Surveillance continues. Subject remains with Carter. Maintain observation until further instructions." Lucas quietly stepped back before anyone noticed him. For the first time since entering Ethan's world, he understood that whatever danger surrounded them was not fading away. It was patiently waiting. Lucas spent the rest of the evening pretending he had seen nothing. He returned to the music room, closed the piano lid gently, and sat beside the window while rain continued to fall across the gardens. Yet his thoughts refused to settle. The message displayed on the security monitor had answered one question while creating many more. Someone was deliberately watching him because he was with Ethan. That meant Ethan had never exaggerated the danger, and every unusual decision since the day they met had been made. For a reason Lucas still did not fully understand. When Ethan eventually returned, he found Lucas reading in the library beside the fireplace. "I am sorry that took longer than expected," Ethan said. Lucas placed a bookmark between the pages and smiled politely. "Everything all right?" Ethan hesitated for the briefest moment before answering. "Everything is under control." Lucas recognized that familiar balance between honesty and restraint. Ethan had not lied, but he had not revealed everything either. This time, instead of pressing for answers, Lucas simply nodded. "I believe you." Those 3 words seemed to surprise Ethan more than any difficult question ever had. The following morning, the estate felt unusually peaceful. Sunlight reflected across the bay, birds gathered near the gardens, and the house seemed almost untouched by the quiet concerns hidden behind its walls. Lucas decided to visit his architectural office for the first time since moving into Ethan's home. As he prepared to leave, Ethan walked into the front hall carrying a slim leather folder. "I thought you might need these," he said, handing Lucas several updated project documents that had been delivered earlier that morning. Lucas accepted them with genuine appreciation. "You remembered my meeting." Ethan smiled faintly. "It mattered to you." Before Lucas stepped outside, Ethan spoke once more. "2 members of my security team will remain nearby today." Lucas looked at him with understanding rather than frustration. "They are there because of what you already know, correct?" Ethan searched Lucas's expression, realizing something had changed. "Yes." Lucas adjusted the strap of his messenger bag. "Then I will not argue." Throughout the afternoon, Lucas noticed the protection only because he knew where to look. A familiar sedan remained parked across the street from his office. A woman reading a newspaper at a nearby cafe occasionally glanced toward the entrance. None of it interrupted his work, and none of the security personnel approached him directly. They simply remained close enough to respond if necessary, while allowing him to continue living as normally as possible. That quiet respect strengthened Lucas's trust even further. After work, he chose to stop by the waterfront before returning home. Standing beside the harbor, he watched ferries cross Elliott Bay while cool evening air carried the scent of salt water. Ethan unexpectedly arrived a few minutes later, having finished his own meetings early. Neither man spoke immediately. They simply leaned against the railing, watching the city lights gradually appear one by one. "I owe you more of the truth," Ethan finally said. Lucas turned toward him without interrupting. Ethan took a slow breath. "Several years ago, someone close to my family made a decision that affected many lives, including yours, although neither of us knew it at the time." Lucas frowned slightly. "My family?" Ethan nodded. "Your father once protected someone who later protected mine. They never asked for recognition. They simply believed helping another person was the right thing to do." Lucas stared at him in surprise. "My father never mentioned any of that." "He would not have," Ethan replied quietly. That was exactly the kind of man he was. Lucas felt an unexpected emotion rise inside him. His father had passed away years earlier, leaving behind only memories of kindness and quiet integrity. Hearing that those choices still echoed into the present felt almost impossible. Ethan continued gently. "When I learned your name, I understood that an old promise had become my responsibility. Protecting you is not about obligation alone. It is about honoring a debt that can never truly be repaid." Lucas looked out across the water, allowing the revelation to settle. At last he understood why Ethan had been willing to risk his reputation, his privacy, and even his own peace to keep him safe. This marriage had never begun as a strategy for power. It had begun as the continuation of a promise made by 2 honorable men years before either of them had ever met. As they stood together beneath the fading evening sky, Lucas quietly realized something else had changed without either of them noticing. For the first time since signing the marriage certificate, he no longer felt protected by a stranger. He felt protected by someone whose place in his life had already become far more meaningful than either of them had planned. The conversation by the waterfront stayed with Lucas long after they returned home. For the first time since their unexpected marriage, he understood that Ethan had never viewed protecting him as a burden. It was a promise carried across generations, quietly honored without asking for recognition. That realization changed the way Lucas looked at the man across the breakfast table the next morning. Ethan was still composed, still careful with every word, but Lucas now recognized the quiet kindness hidden beneath his disciplined exterior. As the days passed, the atmosphere inside the estate became noticeably warmer. They no longer measured every conversation or hesitated before sharing ordinary moments. Lucas often worked in the garden with his sketches while Ethan reviewed documents nearby, and although they rarely interrupted each other, simply sharing the same peaceful space somehow became the best part of the day. One afternoon, Lucas accidentally dropped a folder of architectural drawings as a strong breeze swept across the terrace. Sheets scattered over the lawn before he could react. Without saying a word, Ethan immediately set aside an important phone call, walked into the garden, and helped gather every page before the wind could carry them farther away. Lucas laughed softly as they collected the final drawing together. "Those papers were probably less valuable than the meeting you interrupted." Ethan handed him the last page with a calm smile. "The meeting could wait." Lucas looked at him curiously. How did you know these mattered so much? Ethan answered with complete sincerity. Because they matter to you. The simple response stayed with Lucas for the rest of the afternoon. No dramatic confession could have carried greater meaning. Later that evening, they prepared dinner together for the first time. Ethan admitted that his cooking skills were limited to a few family recipes his mother had taught him years earlier. Lucas volunteered to handle the vegetables, while Ethan carefully prepared homemade soup. Their teamwork was awkward at first, filled with small mistakes, and quiet laughter whenever they reached for the same kitchen utensil at the same moment. By the time dinner was ready, the elegant dining room felt less like a formal estate and more like the home of two people slowly learning how to build an ordinary life together. After dinner, Lucas noticed Ethan studying an old framed photograph resting on the living room bookshelf. It showed a younger Ethan standing beside his parents during a summer picnic. Lucas walked over quietly. Your mother had a beautiful smile. Ethan nodded. She believed a peaceful home was the greatest success anyone could achieve. Lucas looked around the quiet room before smiling gently. I think she would like this place. Ethan remained silent for a moment before answering. She would like the person who helped bring life back into it. Lucas felt his face grow warm and quickly looked away, unsure how to respond. The compliment had been spoken so naturally that it felt impossible to dismiss. A few days later, Ethan informed Lucas that an important charity gala would be held downtown, supporting scholarships for students studying architecture and urban planning. I usually attend alone, Ethan explained while adjusting his tie before work. This year I hoped you might come with me. Lucas smiled. That sounds much better than spending another evening reviewing blueprints. The gala took place inside a beautifully restored historic hotel overlooking the waterfront. Guests greeted Ethan with respect, but Lucas quickly noticed something unexpected. Despite Ethan's reputation, nearly everyone thanked him for supporting hospitals, schools, neighborhood restoration projects, and educational programs throughout the city. The image the public quietly carried of Ethan differed greatly from the rumors Lucas had once believed. Throughout the evening, Ethan never left Lucas standing alone. He introduced him with genuine pride, listened carefully whenever Lucas discussed architecture with donors, and made certain he felt included in every conversation. As they prepared to leave, an elderly professor approached Lucas with a warm smile. You have changed him, the professor said softly. Lucas looked confused. Changed him. The professor nodded toward Ethan, who was thanking several volunteers nearby. I have known that young man for nearly 20 years. Tonight is the first time I have seen him smile this often. Before Lucas could answer, Ethan returned and politely excused them. During the drive home, neither man mentioned the professor's words, yet both remembered them. As the estate gates slowly opened beneath the quiet evening sky, Lucas realized something had happened without either of them ever speaking about it. The marriage that had begun as protection no longer felt like an arrangement created by circumstance. It had quietly become the safest place either of them had ever known, even though neither had yet found the courage to say why. When people finally feel safe, they often discover that the hardest decision is no longer how to survive, but how to choose the life they truly want. Nearly 2 months had passed since Lucas had moved into the estate, and what had once felt unfamiliar had quietly become home. His sketches now filled the studio overlooking the gardens. His favorite coffee always found its place beside the drafting table each morning, and evenings with Ethan had become the calmest part of every day. Neither of them spoke about how naturally they had settled into each other's routines, yet both understood that something important had changed. The distance that once existed between them had slowly disappeared, replaced by trust that no longer required constant reassurance. One bright Saturday morning, Lucas received exciting news from the city planning committee. His waterfront garden proposal had been selected as the preferred design for a major community project. The announcement filled him with genuine happiness. Before he could share it with anyone else, Ethan walked into the studio carrying breakfast. Lucas looked up with a wide smile that Ethan had rarely seen before. They accepted it, Lucas said, holding out the official letter. Ethan read it carefully before looking back at him with unmistakable pride. I never doubted they would. Lucas laughed. You are saying that now. Ethan smiled gently. I believed it long before today. That afternoon, Ethan quietly arranged a small celebration in the estate garden. Nothing extravagant, only fresh flowers, Lucas's favorite desserts from the bakery they had discovered together, and several close members of the household who had become like family. As the evening sunlight filtered through the maple trees, Lucas realized that everyone around him was celebrating not only his success, but also his happiness. During the gathering, Ethan received a phone call. He stepped aside for several minutes before returning with an expression Lucas had learned to recognize: calm, thoughtful, and quietly relieved. Once the celebration ended and the guests drifted back inside, Ethan asked Lucas to join him on the terrace overlooking Elliott Bay. The familiar breeze carried the scent of salt water as ferries crossed the evening horizon. Ethan rested both hands on the railing before speaking. "There is something you deserve to know." Lucas listened without interrupting. "The people who have been watching us have ended their surveillance. Earlier today, my security team confirmed they have withdrawn completely." Lucas absorbed the news in silence. "So it is over?" Ethan nodded. "As far as we can determine, yes." For the first time since their unexpected marriage, the invisible weight surrounding them seemed to disappear. After several quiet moments, Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed a neatly folded document. He handed it to Lucas without a word. Lucas unfolded the papers and immediately recognized them. They were legal documents requesting the dissolution of their marriage. He looked up in surprise. Ethan spoke with complete sincerity. "When we married, I promised I would never take away your freedom. The reason for our arrangement no longer exists. You may leave whenever you wish, and if you decide to build a different life, I will make certain nothing stands in your way." Lucas stared at the papers while countless memories filled his mind. Morning coffee shared in comfortable silence. Evenings by the piano. Walks through Pike Place Market. Ethan remembering every small detail that mattered to him. The patient kindness that had slowly transformed strangers into partners. None of those moments had been part of any agreement. They had simply become part of their lives. Lucas folded the documents carefully and placed them back into Ethan's hands. Ethan looked confused. "You do not need to decide tonight." Lucas smiled softly before answering. "I already have." Ethan remained completely still. Lucas looked out across the peaceful water before continuing. "At first I stayed because I believed you were protecting me. Then I stayed because I trusted you. Somewhere along the way, I stopped counting the reasons." Ethan lowered his eyes for a brief moment, overcome by an emotion he rarely allowed anyone to see. Lucas reached over, not dramatically but naturally, resting his hand gently beside Ethan's on the railing. "If I remain here," Lucas said quietly, "it will not be because of a promise made years ago. It will be because this is where I want my future to begin." Ethan looked at him beneath the fading evening sky, realizing that the choice he had hoped Lucas would someday make had finally arrived freely, without obligation, without fear, and without either of them needing to ask for anything more. The most extraordinary promises are not the ones spoken in front of witnesses. They are the ones quietly renewed every ordinary day afterward. The morning after their conversation on the terrace, the atmosphere inside the estate felt lighter than it had since Lucas first arrived. Nothing dramatic had changed on the surface. The gardens still welcomed the sunrise with gentle birdsong, fresh coffee still waited in the kitchen, and Elliott Bay still reflected the soft colors of dawn. Yet everything felt different because, for the first time, both men knew they were sharing the same future by choice rather than necessity. Ethan found the unsigned dissolution papers neatly folded on his office desk with a handwritten note resting on top. It read, "Some agreements deserve to end. Ours deserves the chance to become real." Ethan stood silently for several moments before carefully placing the papers inside a drawer that would never need to be opened again. Life gradually settled into a peaceful rhythm that neither of them had imagined possible. Lucas completed the waterfront garden project that had once existed only as sketches scattered across a drafting table. Months later, when the park officially opened to the public, families filled the walking paths, children laughed beneath newly planted maple trees, musicians performed beside the water, and visitors admired a space designed to bring strangers together. Ethan attended the opening ceremony quietly from the back of the crowd, allowing Lucas to receive every moment of recognition without interruption. After the ceremony ended, the mayor thanked Lucas for creating a place where people could slow down, reconnect, and simply enjoy one another's company. As applause echoed through the park, Lucas searched the crowd until his eyes found Ethan. Their smiles met across the distance, requiring no words to understand everything they wished to say. On the drive home, Lucas looked out the window before speaking softly. My father always believed that the places we build eventually shape the people who live in them. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. He was right. Lucas turned toward him. I think people do the same. Ethan glanced at him with quiet curiosity. Lucas smiled. You build a place where I could finally feel safe. Without realizing it, you also helped me become someone stronger. Ethan answered just as gently. You brought life back into a home that had forgotten how to feel like one. That autumn, they planted 2 young maple trees beside the garden overlooking Elliott Bay, choosing the exact location together. Ethan explained that his mother had always believed trees reminded people that the most meaningful things in life required patience. Lucas carefully pressed fresh soil around the roots before stepping back beside Ethan. How long do you think they will live? He asked. Ethan smiled toward the small trees swaying in the breeze. Long enough to remind us where everything truly began. Years passed with quiet happiness rather than extraordinary adventure. Their evenings remained filled with books, music, shared meals, long conversations, and comfortable silence. Ethan continued supporting schools, hospitals, and neighborhood restoration projects throughout Seattle, while Lucas became known for designing public spaces that encouraged community, accessibility, and hope. Friends often remarked that they balanced each other perfectly, though neither man ever tried to explain why. The answer had never been found in grand declarations. It had been built through countless ordinary choices made every single day. One evening, as another sunset painted Elliott Bay with familiar shades of gold and blue, Lucas and Ethan sat together on the terrace where so many important conversations had quietly unfolded. The 2 maple trees had grown taller than either of them expected, their branches gently moving in the evening breeze. Lucas looked toward the peaceful garden before resting his hand beside Ethan's exactly as he had done months earlier. This time, Ethan naturally intertwined their fingers without hesitation, as though the gesture had always belonged there. Neither of them felt the need to speak. They had already said everything that mattered through trust freely given, promises faithfully kept, and a love that had never demanded attention to prove its strength. The marriage that had once existed only to protect one life had quietly transformed into a home where 2 hearts discovered that the safest place they would ever find was simply beside each other. And in that peaceful truth, they finally understood that the greatest love stories are not defined by the way they begin, but by the quiet courage to choose one another again and again with every new sunrise.